So despite some questionable 3D at the army situation, and overall the episode as a whole wasn't the most spectacle-driven, there's actually quite a bit of interesting content from the reveal that Dia is Luke's cousin, and the fact that the father is actually made a very similar decision of kind of like abandoning his own principles and rules one time, and that was for love as well, to the interesting use of magic in ways that most fantasy shows don't really go about it, because typically you just have casting of fireballs, lightning strikes, not really the idea of kind of making a shield that can pretty much push you forward without having that air resistance after a certain speed. I think the mention was like 40 kilometers after that point. It's kind of, there's so much resistance that you lose that speed. To even just the idea of like Tart and just how far she was willing to go, despite being heartbroken that she's not Luke's first love, still willing to do anything for someone who literally gave her the world. There was actually quite a bit that was very interesting, despite this episode not really moving all that much. And what I mean is that, the first 6-7 minutes of this episode, pretty much, we have the same 5 or 6 shots that keep getting used, because clearly, like with most productions, around the end point, things start to struggle a bit more. So they had to take a little shortcut in order to make the episodes finish on time. And of course, in a perfect world, things would be better, but I'm just here saying, like, as long as it's not a stick drawing, I'm probably going to be A-okay, even as laughable as the army scene was. And I thought the reveal of the cousin was an interesting twist, because we don't necessarily know how deep in the cousin line it is. We don't know if it's a 10th cousin, we don't know if it's a first cousin. Ultimately, though, it doesn't quite matter, because for one, it's not like they were raised as family. It's not like Luke looked her as a cousin or a sister or anything like that the entire time. They were very two separate people with no connection until they started to fall in love. And two, this is a world with magic as well as it's a medieval-like setting. This type of shit was not really frowned upon as much. The most shocking reveal wasn't to the father, like, revealing to Luke that they're cousins. The most shocking reveal was realizing the father did the exact same thing Luke's about to do in order to save Dia, so it's not really that big of an issue. In terms of the reason behind the assassination, I saw some people talking about how they thought Luke was going to kill his father so he wouldn't have to kill Dia, and I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Luke very much cares for his family as he cares for Dia. No one's going to die here. Obviously, faking of the death seemed likely. I just wasn't expecting that it was actually sent by the father himself in order to save her, because ultimately, the only way that this might go about an A-OK situation is if they think Dia's dead, and ultimately, if we look back at episode 1, we know Dia ends up in Luke's party, so the only way to do that is either to fake a death, create a new identity, maybe a bit of both. But the interesting way of using episode 10 as this cliffhanger, holy shit, he has to kill Dia, to immediately resolving it in a satisfying way in terms of why things are happening, I thought was really good. And like I mentioned, I love the idea of the magic and how everything was going about in this episode as well. I love the idea of the air resistance and how Luke, if he was going to go by himself, he would have used pretty much all his mana just to get to the location. How is he supposed to save her while at the same time killing her in the eyes of the public? So having Tart goes to such an extreme, seeing her cry as well. I wasn't expecting seeing something quite like that. It was definitely a little heartbreaking for sure. But ultimately, it was just one of those things that you saw, even though she wishes she could be number one in Luke's heart, she understands that she can't force her own opinions and beliefs on him because he has his own desires. And to see the way he was like going about sniping and just the idea of the mage users, I thought despite visually it not looking all that great, they had some interesting coordination, like the idea that the opposing forces, they had magic users spread throughout their infantry, and how because if you have your magic users in the front line, they're going to get killed right away. But on the flip side, they pretty much do have so many magic users on their offensive, so they can do a lot of like offensive attacks that they can't. And with the sniping that Luke taught Dia, she was able to hold off quite a bit. So to see him snipe out the magic users, to then basically using a grenade launcher, he literally took that magical ball, put it in an arrowhead, and shot it with a silent bow to make a grenade launcher. There's just so many cool things from the way weaponry is used, and I like this little detail where after he's done, he created a sniper rifle and a bow, and as he was leaving, he pretty much disintegrated it into this like rock, so no one could use it against him. It's just like the little details that go a long way. That's why I like stuff. That time I got reincarnated as slime, Ascendance of the Bookworm. There's so many different series that don't just use the typical magical stuff. They use things like, oh, we're going to use a rune to heat up water, because in this day and age, hot water plumbing isn't a normal thing, but with magic you can do it. Any anime or any story that goes the extra mile to add those unconventional magical tricks, not just the generic things that everyone can come up with, is really going to set a power system apart from your run-of-the-mill average show. It's definitely going to be interesting though, because with, one episode to go, how do they plan on ending this, right? Faking her death and her getting out seems likely, but I'm wondering if there's going to be a big reveal, because they definitely continue to tease the goddess storyline and the fact that it seems like the one person who's suitable at basically succeeding would be Lugh. But at the same time, I highly doubt he's going to go according to plan either. It's just he's probably not going to go exactly with the way she wants to go about things, because I know there's definitely some opinions that Dia's the hero. I mean, there's definitely going to be someone that is the hero that we don't expect. I just don't think it's going to be Dia. I think that might be a little too on the nose, but I'm also not completely opposed to the idea. It just feels to me like we haven't reached the point of introducing the hero yet. Maybe that will be the cliffhanger. I'm not sure. Either way, though, this was a pretty interesting episode, even if visually it was a little underwhelming. It's one of those things that I really enjoy this show. I know it's definitely not going to be for everyone, but it's one of those shows that I think it gets more right than it does wrong. I mean, the worst things that I would criticize and change about this is when the production does get a little messy, but that's something that is unfortunately true for anime in general. I mean, it's just something that we have to get used to. There's far too much anime being made, so you can't expect everything to look like top tier Demon Slayer action 24/7. And it's going to be interesting because generally when it comes to Blu-ray touch-ups, I'm not the most keen in rewatching once it gets uploaded to very official sites and torrenting locations. Usually I'm not as interested in seeing how they touch things up, but I mean, it'll be interesting to see if any of, like, an episode like this as an example, the 3D crowd, it was just like these little robotic dolls. So I'm curious to see, would they do any, like, cleaning up there, just either making the 3D look a bit better, or are they going to do some more hand-drawn sequences? Because as much as I may not like that one 3D Berserk that they made, despite it still not looking good, they did make some massive improvements in the Blu-ray at least, so maybe they'll do something similar here. But either way, I mean, this is a show that I really enjoy. I think the characters are interesting. I think that there's a lot of heart in it, and the fact that Luke stuck true to not being a tool and doing something he normally would never do. You don't get to see that type of thing when it comes to an isekai character being reincarnated and really going against his original life, but having an assassin as your main character raised as another assassin, but as a human first and foremost, really does provide for some pretty interesting content. Hopefully, though, if there is some sort of action scene next week, hopefully that's the scene that's getting the most polished, because it would be really cool to see maybe someone like a very powerful magic user, even if it's not like the hero or someone like that, really confront Lugh and, put a spoil to the plan of making it look like she's dead. I mean, it clearly has to work given the first episode, so maybe on one hand, maybe directing episode 1 the way they did, spoiling the surprise of Dia, maybe isn't the best thing ever, but it's interesting because I feel like there has to be an explosive moment that we just probably can't quite predict just yet. I'm glad the parents are sticking around. I really didn't think they were going to make it to the end of the anime, but maybe that's just so they can kill them at the end. If they did that, I'd actually be pretty disappointed because they're just such a great additions. But at the same time, Luke's really become a fine man, and like the father says, he's more powerful than he ever could be, and we already knew how much of a badass the father was to begin with. So that's what I kind of like about it, is how every element of the show really does work in harmony to create such an interesting beast. Let me know your thoughts and feelings on this week's episode, how you think it's going to all wrap up next week. Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.